EOGs will tell us that information that we're seeking about which kids are on grade level or not. At that point, it's too late, right? It's given at the end of the year, and so there's no ability to respond that year. The teachers the next year can look at that and say, which kids am I getting who are on grade level, which kids am I getting who are not on grade level. Again, all of these will be administered. The closest that we might have to a universal screener is dibbles, and we're not doubling up with dibbles, right? In K3, we give dibbles. It is a universal screener. It tells us is the child on grade level or below grade level, what foundational skills do they have or not have, and how do we respond to that. So dibbles does provide us that important information, right? So, you know, the folks here in the room, they spoke eloquently and really made good points. I'm a huge fan of Mr. Santoro. I just want to correct 88% accuracy with iReady in terms of whether or not children are going to pass the EOG. So it is highly predictive. And so the EOG is an important test that all of our schools end up getting measured by. Last thing I'll say is this. I spoke to Mr. Laufer, principal at Sherwood, before the meeting, and he said, I really need information on my teachers to know which teachers I should move into which classrooms. He wants to use growth data. As you all know, we don't have that yet for last year. That's frustrating. We can all talk to DPI and say, I wish we had that growth data back. Whereas with iReady, we get growth data at the middle of the year, we get growth data at the end of the year. So EOGs do give us growth data. They don't give us that growth data until the following November. So there's a quick overview of the tests that we administer already and the information that we get from those tests.
So to help connect with some grounded foundation from last time, we want to just cover some critical points as we open up the floor for additional questions as well. So as we think about diagnostics, the goal is to use those to have a reliable source of consistent data. We think about teacher-made assessments, they're extremely important. One of the things that is really challenging is how do you create a valid and reliable assessment? It must go through rounds of validity and reliability to be known as a valid assessment. And that's a rigorous expectation, and so we do need teachers to be able to create assessments daily in their classrooms to support our students, to see where they are in the learning process. But that is not the responsibility we want to put on our teachers, as that's a process that takes a lot to invest to get to an assessment you can utilize and be able to compare, again, across schools, between schools, and to look at discrete skills to help support student learning. Also, we think about norm assessments, reference across the standard, comparable district-wide, as I just mentioned, administered 3 times a year that provide that data to focus on professional learning for coaching supports for schools. If we did not have these type of assessments, it would be hard for us to identify where are the needs at our schools and where will our coaches provide supports based on the needs of our students for teachers. Also looking at providing feedback as well around instruction, around how we support using our instructional tools like our unit planning organizers to help support teachers as well. It also, as I mentioned, informs our NTSS process, our EC referral process, and data on our student progress. Currently, I want to note this, iReady is used for K-8 reading and math. The recommendation is for iReady for K-8 math and 6-8 reading and math. No K-5 reading for iReady. So I just wanted to clarify that because that was a question that came up as well. iReady is an adaptive diagnostic assessment. It identifies student strengths and instructional priorities. It measures their growth. Again, this is not just about grade level standards. As we know, the needs of students, things are not performing at the grade level, and so this provides skills on a continuum of grade levels to help support our students. It provides insight for our students on their learning and on standards as well. 3 times a year as mentioned, the results support the next steps, intervention and acceleration as we move up for our students. So just as a note of the uses of iReady, this is just a list. The diagnostic is a 45-minute assessment. It is not administered at one time. There is a window, as we mentioned, for students to complete. It is allowable for students to be able to have a certain amount of time to be able to complete that within that window of assessment. Some other pieces that I might not have mentioned, and I just want to highlight, small group creation, of course, is important. For direct and individualized links to instructional resources are provided through the use of the diagnostic as well. So some historical context for us, the district has used iReady as a universal screener and diagnostic in Winston-Salem for Forsyth County since 2019. That was the recommendation for us to go K-8 for math and reading. The initial goal was to ensure that our schools had consistent data. At that point, only some of our highly impacted schools had some consistent data sources and were using iReady at that point. That initial cost was about a $1.3 million annual cost investment. And so this next slide shows you from the progression of time. I didn't put 2019-20 up here, because that was our initial year, but since 2021, we have spent anywhere from 1.2 to 1.3 million, and that included, it shows you the diagnostic for reading and math, the personalized instruction path, which is not being recommended, as well as the math toolbox. You will see for the recommendation for 24-25, there is a significant decrease to $400,000 because it's only the math diagnostic for 6-8, yes, for reading, but no elementary due to in-class, no personalized instruction. The math toolbox will still be recommended because it's a part of the core instructional resources. What you will see on the next slides are data. So there are two snapshots. The first one is March data from some iReady. It's what we call super schools. We look at their performance either based on their diagnostic growth or instructional usage. So you will see some schools were highlighted for their growth based on their student performance in the diagnostic windows or their instructional usage to help support their student improvement. And you see there are schools highlighted from every area in this recommendation slide. I also want to invite either Principal Wright or Elizabeth to come forward. I just want to highlight, they as a school have focused on iReady and the support for their growth at their school. I know Elizabeth has been there quite a time as their NCL, and thinking about engagement, data, school culture, and how they use it not only to identify students' gaps and weaknesses, they've also done an excellent job in integrating their instructional assistants. So I'd love for you all to just take a minute to highlight that and work with them.
Okay, so we started this work with our former principal, Mrs. Angie Chalker. And with the engagement, we do something to sort of incentivize the students. If they get a certain amount of lessons passed, and they get their minutes in, they get extra recess. Teachers in their classroom have a different, they may add something extra to it where they give them another incentive with the kids. We take it where, like I said, we drive the instruction by data. We really look at the data to determine where to go next. And like Andy Craft said, we can't just look at just checking in and just EOG data. We need multiple data sources to determine what's next, because every kid does not test the same, and we can't teach everybody the same way. We talk about data. We have data meetings at least 3 times a year with the entire grade level, including the ESL teacher, the MTSS coordinator, and our AIG teacher, and talk about where the kids are, where they're moving next, using iReady in class to determine what to do next with the student. We do dedicate at least 45 minutes a week and we do it during small group instruction, so it's not during the core instruction time, it's during small group instruction, and we have our instructional assistants to help us with that piece during our small group time, where we say at least 15 minutes on iReady, and then after they do 15 minutes, they may do some word study activities during small group math time. They may do 15 minutes of iReady and do 15 minutes of maybe an enrichment activity with the small group with the teacher, or small group with the instructional assistant doing the remediation skill. And then we try to make a little competitive effort with the teachers to say, hey, different incentives for the teachers as well, not just with the students, just to have the extra buy-in with the teachers and the students. And we just say, we want our students to just grow, and the way we're doing iReady, we meet the kids where they are, we're focusing on the growth. We know teachers can't do it all, and iReady is another tool to help us close those achievement gaps.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us as a board. You also see some comments provided by that team as well. And so as some comparison data, you also have information from the June 2024 data from the iReady Super Schools, again, showing and illustrating diagnostic growth. And that looks at students' growth on a continuum of their learning on skills, not necessarily on grade level instruction. And so I think that's important to note. We look for catch-up growth for students. They have to create the conditions to accelerate their learning to be able to get to grade level proficiency. As well as looking at this one, you see information about instructional usage. Another school that we have to highlight that was unable to come today is Southeast Middle School. And what I want to highlight for just a second around Southeast Middle School is they did a school reset and they engaged in the iReady Collaborative. And that was a process around how do we look at student engagement as a tool as we use our iReady circuit. So they partnered with the iReady team, and one of the empowering pieces is a story about seeing students' efficacy grow, teachers' efficacy grow, and the belief that they could grow their skills. And so I wish we could hear their powerful story. I wish I had a recording to be able to share with you. They were not able to attend today. The other piece that I will say is that you heard a little bit about intentionality, about how you use it for small groups. The other piece that we want to align to thinking about deeper learning is student goal setting and student motivation. And so having tools to look at data is an opportunity for us to integrate those focused priorities that we also want to infuse into the program as well. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the teacher toolbox, which was originally proposed directly in the recommendation, as we reflected on the fact that the toolbox is a part of our core instructional planning organizers, and the next slide shows you an example. We would like to still move forward to that because it's a core instructional resource. If the recommendation by chance is not approved, we would not receive the couple discount to be able to leverage that, but we still see that as a beneficial tool because it helps with teachers' next step recommendations, as well as providing lessons for small groups and instructional support specifically for math. And here's a little bit more about the toolbox as a resource and the link for you to be able to access and review the unit planning organizers that are included for every single grade level for K-8 for mathematics with use of the toolbox. And so the last thing I want to talk about is supplemental instruction, or what you might hear called personalized learning. So you heard today several schools that talked about how they utilize that as an additional tool. That is not a part of the direct recommendation for approval today. However, there are some schools that will look for an opportunity to think about how do we provide additional practice for our students around skills and gaps. And so what we have looked at is that as a system, we are not able to sustain paying for the supplemental instruction, but schools could leverage additional resources to be able to provide that for students. And so we looked at that in different ways based on instructional usage of this tool when it was provided by the district. So in elementary, we had our highest usage, and so we looked at how can we give a proportional allotment to schools based on non-proficient students, based on their student groups that were not performing as we would expect and needing levels of support and growth. And that was used to calculate a funding dollar that we could contribute to schools for them to purchase an instructional resource tool. That was only for elementary because they had only consistent usage to support in coupling that with the district pay for the resource. For middle schools, however, as a possible pilot opportunity, if we are to approve this recommendation today, they will get access to the iReady Collaborative and be able to participate and engage in resetting around appropriate use of the tool with support for personalized learning instruction, for students as complementary. And so that is gonna be offered if we continue to move forward with this contract. And then high schools, they are the first time implementing a new screener. We've not provided any additional personalized instruction plans. And so you see the timeline that we have, and this shows we started in March having conversations with schools around where we were, both budgeting, current context, engaging with conversations around vendors, around personalized instruction, reviewing recommendations around what is the district's, best resource tool for interim and diagnostic assessments. Of course, we came to you all with the first recommendation on June 11th for the full continuum. June 25th or 26th, you all had to vote, and now we are here again to revisit part of the recommendation. And so you see the recommendation for, approval and consideration for the board for 24-25 for K-5 math and 6-8 ELA. And in closing, I just wanna say, you've heard from various schools, both leaders and teachers, around the student support for a diagnostic and interim assessment. We go back to our goal today about a comprehensive assessment system, and we need all pieces to support our students. And as we think about critical needs around our MTSS process, EC referral, small group instruction, being able to look at students' understanding and knowledge of skills based on a continuum and not just grade level, we would ask the board to think about approval of the staff recommendation. And we've also invited our 2 leads for math and ELA, and they are also open to provide any additional, information about questions that you may have as board. So I just want to open the floor. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, first, Vice Chair Burnett.
So, Dr. Wilkins, quite a few questions. I just want to tell you ahead of time. The first, and these are not in any kind of particular order, what was the impetus for the reduction in the contract from previous years? Why did we decide to do that?
So a couple of things. I'll take it from a couple of angles, if that's okay. So one of the things when we went in 2019, I was a principal at the time, we had a system where many schools were investing in personalized instruction options. And so in thinking about district resources, what's available, at that time, the district made a decision to do that whole district. But thinking about the limited resources, budget crisis, we knew we had to think about what could we cut. And so if we were to eliminate the personalized instruction part for the district, that saved a significant amount of money. So that was part of the recommendation. And thinking, quite honestly, schools have made different choices around supplemental instructional support tools. And so for the district to continue to invest in being guardians of our resources, we had to think about that differently. And I think we need to get out of the district's place of providing the personalized instruction. But I believe it has always been a district responsibility to provide data to help both support schools and district support of schools. And so this tool for diagnostic, both MWA, math, and DIBELS provides that from the district lens to help us.
Yeah,
Hope that answers your question.
I've been told we're gonna take turns asking questions.
No problem.
We're gonna sort of take turns. Board Member Kuhn?
I think this is kind of a question and a statement. So we did, ask and, talk about in budgets, wanting all a comprehensive report about, programs that were being used, assessment tools, because like you just stated, different schools are still using various tools. So we have what we're paying for as a district, but then schools are still using many supplemental things. So we aren't being good stewards of our finances. And then, I have stated numerous times to not bring contracts at the last minute and expect them to be approved without a backup plan. I have said that and asked for that so many times. If it is an important situation, don't bring it at the last minute and ask for it to be just blindly approved. I'm very disappointed that something this important was brought at the last minute and it was assumed that it would be approved, and there was no backup. And I still have more questions, but I'll yield to the next person.
Board Member Crowley?
Thank you. Part of our budget meetings also included goals for the district. And those goals included increased student engagement, deeper learning, reducing screen time, reducing the amount of assessments, empowering educators. And in my mind, all those goals appear to not only I don't see where iReady supports any of those goals, but I actually see where iReady is counter to those goals. Could you help me see where our students will be better engaged in deeper learning, reducing screen time, reducing the amount of assessments, and empowering educators?
So I look at it from a couple different ways. So one, previously K-5, we did, use iReady as a diagnostic, that's been removed. So one layer of testing and the recommendation removed. The second piece, moving away from the personalized instruction path as an expectation from district-wide. So really putting the goal and the opportunity for focused teachers to dive into the data. I think of many of what we see, and I will take full ownership as we think about system inefficiencies, we haven't maximized the data in the way that we need to. And to take ownership of that, it's not as much about having the diagnostic or not, it's about how we use it. And that is the piece that I think we have to commit to, and I'm standing here as a CAO, to commit to say, we're gonna take ownership on how we share the data, use it, make it transparent, and how we do coaching support, as well as how schools, and calling out ineffective practices. And I think one of the pieces that we have struggled with is how do we create this really, important accountability system between instructional recommendations and how schools actually live those recommendations. And I think this is shining on a light that we haven't done it well. And to do it right for students, we have to be clear on those expectations, we have to share them, and we have to keep coming back publicly to share for the board for accountability and the public.
Board Member Brown Gaither.
I have some concern because we did, when we, our meeting, we did not pass. I think that sometimes staff does not take that into consideration because they had enough time to start looking at other diagnostics. And to come forth and not have anything in place to say this is an additional, I understand teachers need time so that they know what they're gonna be doing. I understand that. And I know we're starting earlier than we normally do. But I wanna implore all staff who say, that we need to start looking immediately into other things. Like we need to be looking into another diagnostic. And I feel like that was just pushed back in hopes that we would change our minds.
So we did not ignore that. However, we re-looked at everything out there possible. And this still based on evidence is the strongest recommendation. I also just wanna set as a reminder, we came June 11th with very minimal questions. And June 25th with a vote, that was the first time we got additional information that there were concerns. And so I just wanna respectfully say that staff heard that request and we worked to honor it.
Vice Chair Bohannon.
So, Dr. Wilkins, I wanna go back to the discussion around the personalized instruction piece. So, because to be honest with you, I had the feedback from sort of overwhelming was like, we're doing iReady too much. Like I would go into schools, talk to, students and teachers, and it would be like, we're doing iReady too much. And I wanna just understand, fully that the personalized instruction piece that we've removed that's gonna have a significant impact. Like if we pass this today, what is gonna be different in what we're seeing in schools in terms of the usage of iReady on the regular school day? And what does that reduction look like? Because I think that's sort of what I'm after is for people to understand that obviously there's a sizable difference in the amount of the contract in previous years, but how does that show up in classrooms in terms of and to answer Broken Crowley's question about the reduction of the usage of being on the screens and doing all of those things?
So first, it doesn't give them a direct path to be able to say, now go do your iReady time. Like that's no longer an option. What it does get us at, once the assessments are completed 3 times a year, and again, they're done incrementally, to say, how are we using this data? And so here's what I see is the piece for teachers is, how do we use PLT time to dive into the iReady data deeper, right? We no longer have the instructional path to say, now, here's what your instructional usage looks like. and here's how students have grown so many levels. We won't have that data as a system. So that time will be removed. So what will we replace it with? So in our vision for learning and teaching, we are really pushing our staff to really think about how do we design, facilitate, and assess learning to help create the conditions for deeper learning and for real world connection and application of standards. Now, I will also say that's a shift that we are pushing that people have not been accustomed to. And so every time you push for something new, you're gonna have pushback. And so the opportunity here is thinking about how our team is designing lessons, assessments, formative, meaning teachers use in their classroom. So you heard Frankie Sanfora, and I'm gonna call you out because you mentioned this, talking about the ELA team and how they've used the standards mastery rubric to look at the standards and how students do performance tasks and then show their learning. That's what we're trying to really lean into. And our team is prepared and working on the rollout. We'll start actually next week with our instructional leads, and then August 6th with teacher PD, and then supports from our coaches. So that's our goal. So I gave you a little bit of everything. Right.
Board Member Coon?
So we kept NWEA, correct?
So when you say we kept NWEA, this is the first time we've ever
Okay.
used that as a
So we have NWEA,
for high
because
school,
we
correct?
voted on that. But it has the ability to be used 3 through 12.
So we have investigated, and Melissa and Mildred, this is what I'm gonna ask you all to correct me, because I did not talk to the NWEA as much. They have a middle school and a high school component that we deeply investigated. The middle school, they actually took assessments, they looked at standards alignment, they looked at alignment to our EOGs, and the middle school product was not as aligned. And so they also do not have the level of validity, they also use RIT scores, which is a difference. And so we provided that recommendation around the team. I'm gonna invite you guys to come up if you all have additional information too. So we did not make that recommendation for those.
Okay, but we have the ability to use that with a product that we currently approve.
When you say we don't have the ability currently to use it, because that is not what the recommendation that you all approved is for. And so what we submitted to them as a contract does not currently include middle school.
Okay. And when you research NWEA, it does state that they have elementary school. So I'm confused as why you're saying they don't have elementary school. Yeah, they do have elementary.
So I'm gonna ask Phil to speak to that.
Good morning, board members. In reviewing NWEA, one of the grapples that I faced where mathematics was concerned is that it has the diagnostic, but it does not provide any supplemental materials that would help the teachers to then take the information that they received in terms of student performance and translate that into, so what are some lessons that I'm going to then provide for students? When we look at the recommendation for iReady, with the diagnostic, it does not just give the data, but there are also some supplemental resources that are face-to-face that come along with the diagnostic. And so when the teachers are looking at the student performance data from the diagnostic, they then would have access to, they're called tools for instruction, that again, are not designed to be delivered online, but the teachers would use them to help work with students either in small group, whole group, or even one-on-one. It would not call for any more increased screen time because the teachers would be using those materials face-to-face with the students. So when looking at NWEA, we would have a diagnostic, but we would only have a diagnostic with iReady, we would have the diagnostic, and we would also have tools for instruction that would give teachers some resources to help close those gaps.
Board Member Crowley? I have a follow-up. Oh, I'm sorry. One follow-up from Board Member Crowley.
So they don't have instructional connections. I mean, when, you know, I've been looking into it and I actually reached out to the folks at NWE. They have talked about having instructional connections. They've also talked about having ways to connect. And
So-
actually they do, align with our standards, where our teachers are saying that iReady does not align with our standards in math. So I'm a little confused why we would choose something that doesn't align with our standards when we have something that could align with our standards.
So I'll clarify, there are different components of the iReady diagnostic suite and assessment suite. So there is a standards mastery assessment platform where teachers can go in and they can pull some items. Those items are not aligned tightly to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study for K-8 mathematics. The standards mastery platform is not a part of the recommendation for the iReady diagnostic. It is the diagnostic and the tools for instruction come with it. To go back to your statements around NWEA, they do indicate that they have some tools that will help. The issue is they align to tools only if the district is already using that particular set of curriculum resources. They list probably 10 to 15 programs that they align to, but we aren't using any of those programs in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County schools. So because we are not using those intervention programs such as Math 180 or Waggle Math, they wouldn't be able to make recommendations for our teachers to use because we don't have access to those resources.
Board Member Crowley?
Thank you. I've heard, through a lot of the speakers, they refer to iReady as a tool. And I guess that's how I see it. And a tool is something, you know, it implies that there's a need and that it's also for optional use. What consideration has been given to that? Because it sounds to me, just from the emails I've gotten, phone calls I've gotten, hearing speakers here today, that some of our less experienced teachers tend to benefit from this more. And different situations with students. You know, somebody talked about an EC student who benefited from it more. So are we trying to make this into a one-size-fits-all, and since we spent the money on it, everybody has to use it? Or could we target it to be a tool where it's needed and not unnecessarily burden teachers and students with it? Because having a child who did iReady, having subbed in classes where iReady was going on, I'm sorry, but I never received anything more than a full-fledged groan when it was mentioned. So I just don't buy it that kids are loving it, and if they did love it so much, why are we bribing them to get their minutes in? It's just, I think there is a disconnect on what it's actually doing in classrooms as far as how we're serving students and what it's doing to teachers versus the perceived benefits that we're getting.
So I'll respond from the math lens. The piece that I heard groans about was the piece that was connected to the required mandated 30 to 45 minutes weekly. That is not part of the recommendation. The recommendation is purely for the diagnostic. And I would say that in the area of mathematics, every child, regardless of their performance level in mathematics, can benefit from us knowing kind of where they are. And then once every child takes that diagnostic, then the teacher uses his or her professional judgment and expertise to decide what kind of follow-up and support the student gets. And if there are students who are performing below grade level, and I will also add that because children will be children, that they don't always take every test assessment seriously. But that doesn't mean that I, as a classroom teacher, stop providing the assessment. Instead, what I would do is work really hard, and what our teachers do, to help the students see the benefit of the information that not just the teacher's getting from what the student shows up as saying that he or she is able to do, but what the student can learn about his or her areas of strength and what he or she can do to try to do even better in certain areas. So again, from my conversations with teachers, the groans have come oftentimes with we gotta do 45 minutes of iReady again, you've gotta do 45 minutes of iReady again. That's not part of this recommendation at all. It really is the universal screener where every child would take the diagnostic, and from there the teacher would decide what were additional steps that would be needed. And then another good piece about the diagnostic is it's not just a test, but the teachers get access to some resources that can help lift some of the burden of them having to figure out the student is in 5th grade and they have some deficits in fractions, but the deficits really are 2 or 3 grade levels below. It'll help them kind of pinpoint some resources that they can use. But again, this is not about the requirement for them to spend more time on iReady, because I am a firm believer, we don't teach through a computer. We do, however, need to gather some data to help inform our instruction.
Board Member Watts.
I have one more piece to that. So to go to the point of a tool, the appropriate use of the tool is important. And the second piece, whether you've been teaching for 30 minutes or 30 years, to create an assessment to know where every student is based on learner variability is difficult. Is it possible for a 30-year teacher to do it? Absolutely. The time investment it would take for them to differentiate multiple assessments to know if a student is on the kindergarten, 5th, or 8th grade level is extremely difficult. And so being able to have an assessment that does that for you and you can focus on the instruction is a gift. But you can only use it well when you see that tool as an opportunity for now, what is my teaching practice? And so what our focus is how do we take this tool as an expectation for all learners to respond to every learner and their variability.
Board Member Watts.
Ms. Sargent, thank you for that clarification. I think there's a great disconnect in what we're saying or what we're hearing today and what's actually happening in our classroom. And I think we've got to hear, if this is past today, how do we get past this great disconnect? Because I do a lot of volunteer work, and I'm guaranteeing on Fridays, we're doing iReady in a lot of places. And I'm not sure why we're doing iReady when they're in the classroom on Fridays, every Friday. It's my time to do iReady, I gotta do iReady. So there seems to be some kind of disconnect there. And also, as a experienced teacher, do I really need another tool that I can use to help me know my strengths and weaknesses of my students and the time it takes to use that tool to get where I am? And I'm not sure I'll yield that to Ms. Sargent and Ms. Melissa there, they want to ask those questions, but it seems to me we've got to figure out how to bridge the two. And right now, in the last 4 or 5 years in particular, we have relied heavily on this iReady to quote teach our kids. And I know that's not what's the intent, but that's where we seem to be in a lot of our classrooms.
So I'm gonna comment on 2 things and then I'll invite Melissa for any additional, but we need an assessment reset, right? And so when we talk about an assessment reset, as I just talked about the 3 types of assessment, formative, interim benchmark, diagnostic, and summative, right? Teachers, until they understand the power that you must have all 3 and how to use them, will struggle to use them effectively. And as a system, we might have had scattered professional learning to support teachers with that. We've also had a lot of leader turnover, right? So all of that variability creates the conditions that we need to do better with how do we help support every school. We're thinking about an assessment system that focuses on the heart, which is teaching and learning, right? So I 100% agree with you, and that's something that is our job, which will be a next step. The second piece I will say, we only have parts of a continuum for a diagnostic, and we need a comprehensive, right? And so our goal is to get to a response so we can move forward with helping schools with that work on how do we do this better for kids, because we are not serving them well, right? And that's an ownership piece, and we are carrying all of the feedback, which we agree, we've not done assessment well as a system. And we're making a commitment to work on the steps to do that better, to do the reset around how we do this, so we don't have test Fridays, right? That's a culture piece that has been created, it has never been a stated norm, but somewhere it has become the norm that we gotta reset, and that's all of our responsibility. So it's the instructional division's responsibility, and it's also a school responsibility. And so, I don't know if y'all have additional specific either way now, so.
So since we will take away the personalized, component to Mr. Watt's question, it won't be an option to put a kid on iReady on Friday because they won't have access to that. They will have access to some plans, so, for example, if we see that a kid is struggling with determining central idea, they will have access to face-to-face lesson plans to address the skills a student needs to teach before I could teach them central idea, which is a grade level standard. The other thing it provides is, we know we have students going into middle school who are not reading on grade level. During small group, during intervention, they do need access to below grade level text. iReady provides us access to those. NWEA can for high school, but here is why. So we have HMH, our 612 textbook. So if a student is in 10th grade and say is on a 6th grade level, we have access to the 6th grade textbook and the resources, the interventions that they have there that students can access. We don't have that in elementary because that's not our elementary textbook. So it works really well for high school. But in order to get some of those resources, we would have to have that textbook to be able to, if I'm 10th grade and I need 6th grade, I have to have that textbook. They have a few things that they can offer, but not to the extent that we can get through iReady. And I'll be honest, I'm a fan of NWEA. I think for high school, I'm excited about it. We have never had a diagnostic for high school, and this is something that will be consistent. And so, if we could have the resources that our high school teachers will have access to, I think it would be a great selection for middle school as well. But we don't have access to all of those.
Again, I've been away for a few years now, so help me understand. We used to have small groups with level readers based on where students were in their diagnostic information. We had this great plastic bags or books, and it was all based on where they were. Given one, we changed the group from students go from this particular group to this group based on the information they were either learning or lacking. Is that still part of our small group?
So we don't recommend level readers through the science of reading. What we do recommend is two things. So there are two parts to growing that student. One is exposure and scaffolding to grade level instruction. The second is in a small group or for middle school who have like a win period, an intervention group. I might pull out, say if I'm in 7th grade and I need a 3rd grade, I might pull out part of a 3rd grade text to help that student practice the skill with a text he can access. But when he comes back to core instruction, I need him at grade level. What we found leveled reading does is, so we used to use the purple, the green, or the red. We don't want students stuck in those bins.
Right.
I remember those meetings.
But, yeah, those
It
are,
has to be moving in that small group
Right.
instruction, consistently moving.
and that was originally the intent of the whole piece, that we're not stuck in a quote, red book all year. And therefore, if you focus on that intervention and that strategy, that student will then quote, master that strategy and get to another place of learning, so that he's not in that group all year. So, I'm hearing you, so it sounds like maybe, and it's a large district, that we've had turnover, and so we're not really achieving our goals and aims because of some teachers got it, some teachers don't have it. So how do we continue to reassure that everybody's on the same page where you are and where Mr. Bell are? There seems to be a great disconnect in what you're saying to us, what's happening every day in our, especially in the elementary classes.
So I will agree with Dr. Wilkins about needing a plan for this. If you look at something like M-Class and Dibbles, they have very specific protocols for, here's how we look at the data, here's what the data tells us, and here's our next step. We've never had anything like that in the secondary area, and I think we need to add, whatever goes forward, if it's going to be a success, we have to add that. There has to be a plan, because otherwise it does turn into, well, you take it seriously, but this one over here does not take it seriously. And if we're going to use a diagnostic and truly get valid data, we need for that diagnostic to be taken seriously.
Vice Chair Bohannon?
So just, the only question I had was I wanted to dig a little deeper into the usage of incentives for the diagnostic. And Dr. Wilkins, I think this might be a more appropriate question for you. So it's my understanding that I'm aware that the usage of incentives is relative to the use of iReady. That's something that isn't just happening in like one place. That's something that's happening in a few different places. So, but I also know that there's been conversation about the benefit of the usage of incentives to take a diagnostic. So could you talk a little bit about that and, you know, what the best practice is and what we're doing moving forward?
So I'll talk about best practice first. So best practices around setting a culture around continuous improvement learning for students. So as we do any type of assessment for students, we want to remind this is about helping to understand where you are so I can support the learning. We have not, for mindset reasons, for whatever reasons, seen iReady, which is a tool for that purpose. And so what I will say has been stated by many educators has not been met. And so how do we, like going back to that reset plan, start with the educators first, around how do we talk about assessment? How do we talk to our students about assessment and when we do it and why, right? Because if students understand the purpose and why this is a part of my learning process, you get buy-in. The second part is the goal setting is another best practice, right? So as you do this process for the diagnostic, you want students to think about, what do I know and what is something I'm struggling with? They can have a conversation in a conference with you, and when you have that data, to talk to them about it, you then set a goal. And that goal, to me, is the more beneficial part than the incentive. Some people couple the goal with an incentive, which can be appropriately used, but many times it can be overused. And so for us as a system, we wanna focus on and align it to a lot of what we talk about personalized learning practices for students being able to have voice and choice in learning, aligned to deeper learning, is about the goal setting part. So how do we create opportunities for students, for teachers to use goal setting protocols? I would say we've had them, they've not been used. And so how do we create accountability structures? Again, a lot of this is around the collaboration between instruction and schools. You know, how do we work with Dr. Barnes-Jones' team to ensure this is a norm for how we do business as a system? We must recreate our identity. Like, that's a must. There's no exception. And with board support to work on that, I believe it's gonna be accomplished. But we need that in addition to the work that our teams are gonna do to help create that culture. And so I'm gonna say, as we do this reset, there's also an investment for teachers around mindsets and what they speak to their students. And so when we hear things, we're gonna have to call out ineffective practices for for us to get to the next place. And so that's a little bit, so incentives can be appropriate, but we don't want them to be overused. They should only be used when they're coupled with goal setting, when students can be able to articulate what are they working towards. Because that's ultimately what we want anyway. But the other part of that is, how do we decrease that over time so it develops intrinsic motivation, which is also this practice, right?
Thank you.
Yes, board member Karen. Oh, excuse me.
Okay, so this is a want, not a mandate, correct? Okay.
You mean the recommendation?
Right.
Yes, okay.
And we currently have in the district at the elementary level, cluster testing for math that takes about 14 days. We have ELA interim testing that takes about 3 days. We have NC check-ins, for the ELA, for each quarter that takes 3 days, math that takes 3 days, science takes 3 days. So that's about 26 days of testing. And then, just for iReady diagnostics, you say it takes 45 minutes, but that's not classroom reality. It takes sometimes up to 4 days. So if we have beginning of the year ELA, sometimes it takes up to 4 days in classrooms because of students who take longer or have IEPs, etc. So we'll just say, let's just say 3 days. So you have iReady beginning of the year, math, and then you do it again for middle of the year and end of the year. So that's 6 times 3, that's 24 days, 18, sorry. I don't math in my head well. 18 plus 26, that's a lot of days of testing. And we have the ability to not do this one. All the other ones are mandated. But this one is a want.
So I just want to clarify a few things. One of the pieces that you noted about the days count assumes that the full day of instructional time stops. None of these assessments should require 100% of instructional time to be stopped for learning. And if they are, there's a problem. So I would say that first. And so I understand you're counting just because of thinking about overall you have to have some way to equate time, but that is not what has ever been the recommendation. The second piece I would also say is, so far the board has approved to have part of the assessment system in place, and we don't have the other part. We need another part. And so I think this is the recommendation because based on where we are, timing, alignment, what's available is the recommendation. Is it the only recommendation? Absolutely not. And we can look for other recommendations. But we start with teachers next Friday. And though we can work on better timing, I wanna think about teachers, I wanna think about this plan for instructional reset, we can absolutely do something else. But is it in the best interest of where we are with time? I think that is really the pivotal question. And we also still have gaps in the support structures if we don't move forward. Now, if the board wants us to go and move forward with something else, we do whatever is the pleasure of the board to support our students. And I will also say the team has invested a lot of time in researching to come up with this recommendation. And it is not just because this is what we feel like. We want what is best for students. We care about schools. We care about teachers. And there are other recommendations we can use. And if that is what you all want to do, we yield to the board.
Board member Miller?
Sorry.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I'm the only one on this board that has actually utilized this tool as a third grade teacher and as an instructional facilitator. Now, the last time it came forward, I voted against it, as I knew it in the classroom. It's very much like what we've heard from some of our teachers. But this is a reset. It's a totally different look at your diagnostic and your toolkit. It is an outstanding tool if this is how we implement it. We cannot go back to the way that it's been utilized. It was an epic fail. It really was. But if we can look at it, open our minds, be a little open-minded here, and look at this as a diagnostic tool and the toolbox, it really is an outstanding tool.
Board Member Watts.
Dr. Wilkins, you said something very, I think, eye-opening to me, and I think Phil as well. How do we go back and create the time in the classroom to have those rich discussions with our students and we set the goals? And so what's happened, I think, this is an easy way, but teachers don't have the time to have those individual conferences anymore. There's a lot of other things on their plate. How can we, as a district, create time so that we can effectively use this tool to have those discussions? So when I take the diagnostic and I'm deficit in my reading 2 grade levels, or I'm deficit in my math 1 grade level, that teacher can sit down with me and say, hey, Richard, this is where you are. We're going to work on our goal. But the students got to buy into the goal. We're going to work on this goal. We're going to work on this together. And I'm going to support you with resources, et cetera. But how do we create that time to have those rich discussions? That, I think, is a lot where we're disconnected. What we're saying is great, but when you're in that classroom every day, if you're not careful, your time quickly escapes you. And then we rely on, quote, an easy button. So the bigger picture for me is, if we go forward, how can we almost guarantee that we'll go back and get all that we're doing to create time for teachers to take the diagnostic and use it as we are hearing today?
So I think a couple of things, and Andy, you did the math, so you're gonna need to give me the number. So those 30 minutes that are no longer a district expectation, we get to repurpose. And repurposing those minutes in service of helping students to goal set and to think about what's next for their learning is gonna be critical. And also giving teachers time to have interventions and to provide acceleration for students that need it will also be critical as well. I think the other key piece that you mentioned in the process is how do we create clear tools and steps. Here's a script. If you need it, lean into it, right? But these are the key points that we want to message to our students about assessment and why they're doing it. And here's what's next with the data. This is what PLT should be doing. Monitoring PLTs and seeing where they are. We do that already, but with even more intentionality is going to be critical for this to be a success. And places like you've mentioned, a few already, you've seen, we're Test Friday. We need to know about that. So we can begin to work side by side with the principals and the structural leads to reset what has been in effective practice, right? How many hours?
So it'd be 18, so if you go 30 minutes, and we're a 36-week year, right? So that's 18 hours that you're saving to be used for exactly what Mr. Watts is suggesting.
So I think the messaging here is, we've had a district recommendation as a district, take the assessment, 30 minutes of personalized instruction. We're gonna recoup those 30 minutes for the intentionality of goal setting, for small groups, and for teachers to provide more support to direct more instruction around student learning, right? That's a part of what our messaging is. Of course, we have to have a full plan to support that. But I think those are critical pieces in responding to what you just raised.
Board Member Crowley.
Thank you. Dr. Wilkins, can you walk me through what happens if we agree to this $432,000 contract? And I mean, like, when do the assessments occur? How much time for each assessment, and what's done with the results?
So I'll give you loose timelines in months. So if you approve this contract, we provide that information up to iReady and we set a window, a calendar. We've already started some general communications because we have an early start timeline to set that calendar. But the calendar will not start the first week of school. Why? We need to get to know students. We need to set expectations. We need to set norms. We don't need to be doing any type of assessment, other than there might be something if we do a lesson to check in on student learning, like that is what we should be doing the first week. And so that assessment window would start the second or third week of school. We would have up to 4 weeks around that time, and then each school will work to say, within this